So give us just a minute. We'll let some more folks join us, and then we will get started. The time that you guys have committed to us. So we're so grateful to have you here. I want to welcome you to our conversation tonight on race, wrongful conviction, and the death penalty. I am Reverend Anna Lee, and I'm going to be facilitating our panel discussion tonight. And you're going to hear from some amazing folks. So I'm glad you chose to make time to be a part of this. I am a pastor at Cokesbury United Methodist Church in Knoxville, Tennessee, and I also serve on the board for Tennesseans for Alternatives to the Death Penalty, or TADP. You may hear us refer to it as that tonight, which is one of our sponsors for tonight's event. So I'm appreciative for your time tonight, but really grateful to be here and to be a part of this important panel. As we get started, I just want to say thank you to the Justice Initiative, which is a Knoxville-based organization. They work hard to advance a just and fair process for indigent individuals who are impacted by the criminal legal system. Also, thank you to Knoxville's Messiah Lutheran Church for serving as a sponsor, both of those for tonight's conversation. So thank you to both of those groups for helping to make this possible and for supporting the work that's being done. As you guys are aware, this conversation is set up in a Zoom webinar format. So if you've been doing Zooms for the last year, this is a little bit different than maybe some of the Zoom meetings you've been in. That means that you can't verbally ask questions. We're not seeing your face or hearing your voices, but we hope you will ask questions. Use the Q&A feature that should be down in the options at the bottom of your screen. If for some reason that doesn't work, you can also use the chat feature. Either of those will be fine. So you can ask questions as we go, but there'll also be a time for Q&A at the end where we'll take some of those questions that you have been asking and put those to the panel. So as you think of something, if you're afraid you'll forget, you can go ahead and put that in the chat, and we will get to that as we get through the evening. So I want to just briefly introduce our panelists. They'll tell you a little bit more about themselves too, but I want to tell you a little bit about who they are and their work. First, I want to introduce Sabrina Butler Smith. Sabrina, will you wave at folks so they'll know who you are? She was a Mississippi teenager when she was wrongfully convicted and sentenced to die for the death of her infant son, Walter. She endured 5 years in prison, 33 months of which were on death row. Sabrina now lives in Memphis and previously served on the board of Witness to Innocence, which is an organization of, by, and for death row exonerees, empowering them to use their voices to fight for the end of the death penalty in this country. So Sabrina, we thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
Rolanda, if you'll give folks a wave. For the past 20 years, Rolanda Holman has passionately worked to free her brother, Pervis Payne, who many of you know about Pervis's story, and she's been sharing her deep conviction about her brother's innocence. Pervis was convicted and sentenced to death in Shelby County in 1988 and has served over 30 years on Tennessee's death row. He was granted a reprieve by Governor Lee late last year that stopped his scheduled execution on December 3rd, but that reprieve ended on April 9th, which opens the door that the Tennessee Supreme Court could set a new execution date. So Rolanda's voice has just been critical in raising awareness about Pervis's case, the injustices locally, nationally, and internationally that are all wrapped up in Pervis's case. So we thank you, Rolanda, for being with us. We look forward to hearing from you. Kelley Henry, who you don't see on your screen yet, she has been called to the legislature on important business that she's a part of. We hope she's going to get to join in a bit. And if she does it, Stacy Rector is going to make sure to cover the same content that she would have brought to us, but we hope Kelley will get to join us. She is the Supervisory Assistant Federal Public Defender of the Federal Defender of Middle Tennessee, who has represented those sentenced to death for 2 decades. She currently represents Pervis Payne, along with many others on Tennessee's death row. And you might have heard her name recently as she served as counsel for Lisa Montgomery, who was executed by the federal government in January of this year, despite the overwhelming evidence of Ms. Montgomery's very severe mental illness. The American Bar Association recognized Kelley's outstanding work in 2019, giving her the John Paul Stevens Guiding Hand of Counsel Award. So she does amazing work, and we hope she'll get to join us tonight. But finally, Reverend Stacy Rector, if you'll say hey, Stacy, and let folks know who you are, is the Director of Tennesseans for Alternatives to the Death Penalty, TADP, which is an organization whose mission is to honor life by abolishing the death penalty. TADP does work statewide, that's hoping to achieve its mission through education, organizing, and advocacy. Stacy has led TADP since 2006 and has worked on death penalty repeal for 25 years. So I just appreciate all of you taking time to be with us and let us listen to you and learn from you. So we're going to go ahead and get started. So I want to invite Sabrina, if you will start us off and tell us more about your story.
Yes, thank you guys for having me today. My name is Sabrina Butler Smith, and at the age of 17, I was convicted and sentenced to die for the murder of my son. I stayed in a small town called Columbus, Mississippi, which is about 2.5 hours or more from here, where I'm at currently, Memphis, Tennessee. One day I decided to go jogging, and the apartment complex where I stayed, the people didn't know me. So I had been over there a little while, but they still didn't know me. I didn't have a car, a phone, or anything. And I had been in Columbus on my own since I was 14 years old. And at the time I had 2 children. My oldest was almost 2, and he was at his grandparents' house. And I had the baby, which was little Walter. I decided to go jogging that night, and I put little Walter to sleep, and I put him in his crib, and I jogged up the street. And I wasn't gone 10 minutes, but I mean, that was dumb, but me being young and not having anyone to help me, at the time, I thought, I was coming right back and then it was okay. So I jogged up to the end of the street, and my apartments was in a dead end. And when I jogged back and went in the house, I kind of knew what time he would wake up. So I went in the kitchen first. And when I went in the kitchen, I went to get a bottle. And when I went in his room, I noticed he wasn't breathing. And so I panicked. I didn't, know what to do. I had never, been faced with that. So I just grabbed him and I ran. And I started beating on doors. And at the time, it was late. And, like I said, no one already didn't know me over there. So people were, I guess, reluctant to open their doors. The first lady, she opened her door and she told me her kids was in the bed and she didn't have time. She closed the door in my face. So I had to run downstairs. And when I did, I was just beating on anybody that would listen. And so this lady from the end apartment came out and she grabbed my son and she took him in her apartment, put him on the floor and started CPR. So I ran back out to get somebody to help me. And I got this couple that was willing to, take me to the hospital. So when I went back in to get him, she told me to hold his nose, blow in his mouth and press in his stomach. That's what I did. But later on, I would find out that I applied adult CPR to a 9-month-old all the way to the hospital. So when I got to the hospital, the first thought that came in my mind was that, man, you are in so much trouble, because you left him at the house. But never in a million years that I think they would charge me with murder. That was the furthest thing from my head. I didn't have no clue that, it was going to be something like that. So, the first thing I thought to do was to lie. I wasn't honest. And most kids, when they get in trouble, they're not, they'll tell a story. They won't, tell you the truth. And that's basically what I did. So they started asking me questions and I just said whatever. So that night I went home. I wasn't under arrest or anything like that. Got home and I couldn't rest after, something like that, because I didn't know what was going on. So I couldn't wait for the sun to come up. So I made a way back to the hospital. When I got there, the police were there and they said, we want to take you back down for more questioning. And so they took me to the police station. And when they took me to the police station and I went into the interrogation room, I didn't even sit down before they started yelling and screaming and acting like they was going to fight me and all that stuff. And I was scared. This went on for like 4 hours. I didn't have my parents there, didn't have anybody to, tell me what to do. When they said you have the right to remain silent, I thought it meant be quiet until spoken to. I just was oblivious to, to anything that was going on because I was young. I didn't understand. So, after a while of interrogation, I was started telling him the truth. He didn't want to hear that. He kept balling up saying, no, you beat your baby, you stomped him, this is what you did. You over there in those apartment complex, we knew these kind of people would come out of there, this and that. He just started saying all kind of off the wall stuff. So after that, after a long time, I gave up and I just signed where he told me. I signed it on the paper, but I thought that I would give one last ditch effort, and that meant sign at the bottom of the paper. I didn't sign exactly where he told me to, but I did that. And so that's when they charged me with capital murder. They charged me with a child abuse charge that wasn't even a law until 23 days after I was already locked up. So I ended up staying in the county for a year before I even saw my attorneys. I saw them 2 days before trial. Didn't have any preparation. Nobody talked to me. Nobody, told me the aspects of my case. And I still didn't know what happened to my son. I had no clue. Didn't know, what he died from, what happened. Was never told. The attorneys I had found out I had one attorney that was a divorce attorney. He was drunk during the whole trial. The other attorney did not call not one witness, not one in my case. They would not let me take the stand in my own defense. And the district attorney had a field day with that. He called me all kind of, monsters. And, it was horrible because to me, being that young, sitting and looking at the jury, this was not a jury of my peers. They were all white people. And here I am, Black, and I'm sitting here saying to myself, nobody looks like me. So I already knew that I was done for. I already knew they was going to throw me away. I just knew it. And that's exactly what happened. They sentenced me to die. March 13th of 1990, I was sentenced. I was charged with the capital murder. They sentenced me to die by lethal injection July the 2nd, 1990. When I made it to death row, I was 19 years old. Going to death row was one of the hardest things that I could ever, there's nothing that you can measure for something like that. And then being innocent on top of that and accused of killing your own child. That's one of the hardest things for me because before I went there, I had to fight, to protect myself. Because when you go in with those type of charges, you're not liked. And I put up with this for 6.5 years. I did 2 years, 9 months on death row. And I don't wish that on no one, to go through what I had to go through being innocent. Nobody believed me. You know what I'm saying? I tried to tell everybody what happened. Nobody believed me until I ended up with 2 more attorneys. One was named Clive Stafford Smith, who was from England, who was looking at death penalty cases. And mine was one that he was looking at. And he ended up getting a Mississippi attorney called Rob McDuff. They came in, they investigated my case. They found out my son had heart problems, kidney problems, and chronic bowel syndrome. It was nothing that I did to cause his death, nothing. I just was in a system that wanted to make a name for itself, and they chose me to do that. Today, I got an 18-year-old daughter. She has the same disease that my son died from. There's nothing that you could say to me that will change what has been done to me already. And even now, people say, well, you out, you free, you ought to be okay. It doesn't work like that for exonerees. I'm still having to prove my self-worth and figure out how to survive. You can't get jobs out here. What do you tell people? Oh, well, they accused me of a crime, but I didn't do it, and I'm this and that. Who do you think they're going to hire? Me or the next guy that doesn't have all that baggage? I have to deal with this and have been dealing with it for a long time. And I think a lot of this, God has brought me this far. And that's one of the reasons why I tell my story, because I know that's what he wants me to do, to try to reach the public, to let them know that the system that you think is in place is not what it is. It's racially motivated. And that's a fact. They're not sentencing people the way they should. And that is wrong. How can you or we as a people decide who lives and dies when you don't even have a system in place right? You're not picking the right people. They're killing innocent people. If Mississippi would have had his way, I wouldn't be sitting here now talking to you. But thank God he stepped in and he showed my case the way it was. True, I was a young kid, but I didn't deserve to die. And I thank you guys for letting me speak to y'all. And I hope and pray that by you listening, that you will gain something, especially not only my case, but Pervis. He's sitting there now needing help. How would it feel to you to know that you're sitting on death row and nobody's listening? Nobody's helping you. Because once you get behind those bars, there's nothing you can do unless there's someone out there that is willing to help you. That's my story.
Sabrina, thank you so much, not just for being here, but for being so open with us and sharing what is a really traumatic story. And so I appreciate so much you being willing to retell it again and again to help other people to learn, and so that we can work together to change this. So thank you for your willingness. Stacy, I want to turn it over to you. If you can tell us a little bit more about the failure of death penalty policy and why there is growing support for repeal and kind of what all of that means. And glad to see Kelley has been able to hop on with us. Thanks so much for coming, Kelley. I know it's been a long day for you. We'll look forward to hearing from you in a few moments too. So Stacy, if you can tell us a little bit more.
Yes, well, thanks everybody for the opportunity to be here. Thanks for joining with us. For me to tell you a little bit about why we at Tennesseans for Alternatives to the Death Penalty believe that the death penalty system is a failed policy and must be repealed. When the color of your skin, when the amount of money you have in your bank account, when your mental health status or the county that you live in has an outsized impact on whether or not you end up with a death sentence, we know we have a serious problem. And that's the system that we have. Half of Tennessee's current death row comes from a single county in our state, and that is Shelby County. Shelby County, historically home to Memphis, is also among the 25 counties in our country with the most recorded lynchings between 1877 and 1950. It's where the journalist and activist Ida B. Wells wrote an expose about an 1892 lynching, which so enraged the local population that they drove her from her home, and she ended up having to relocate to Chicago. Shelby County is also the county, as you heard earlier, which sent Pervis Payne to death row. And these facts are not coincidental. In our state, African Americans make up about 17% of the state's total population and half of our current death row. Between 2007 and 2017, 8 of the 9 new death sentences handed down in Tennessee were given to Black defendants. And across the country, 75% of cases resulting in executions were for the murders of white people, even though only about half of all murder victims are white. In 2012, Equal Justice Initiative, and that's the organization that Brian Stevenson of Just Mercy, he founded Equal Justice Initiative, and they did research looking at jury selection procedures in 8 southern states, including ours, and they uncovered shocking evidence of racial discrimination in every single state, including counties where prosecutors excluded 80% of African Americans who were qualified for jury service, majority Black counties where defendants were tried by all white juries, and some prosecutors who were actually trained to exclude people from jury service based on race, as well as how to conceal the bias. We saw this racial bias in a case here in Nashville in 1987. Abu Ali Abdur Rahman, who is still fighting his way through this system when the prosecutor in his case struck qualified Black jurors from service based on their race, among other forms of prosecutorial misconduct that occurred in that trial. Last year, the Death Penalty Information Center, or DPIC, released a report entitled Enduring Injustice, the Persistence of Racial Bias in the U.S. Death Penalty. And I think we're going to get that link up for y'all in the chat, but you can also go to deathpenaltyinfo.org and find that report, which again explains how the implicit bias and then overt racism continue to influence the use of our nation's death penalty. Our death penalty system is very, very costly, both in the exorbitant financial costs, costing millions more per case than the alternative sentences, but also, as we know, in the human cost, given the traumatic toll that it takes on far too many people, on the families of murder victims and the families of those who are on death row, who are trapped in a decades-long process, correctional staff who are asked to carry out executions as part of their employment, jurors who may discover years later that they were not given all the facts, or that there are alternative sentences available today that were not available to them when they served on the jury. And of course, attorneys who were impacted, like Kelley Henry, who worked for years and years to represent these men and these women, doing all that they can to try to save their lives. Then there is the issue of accuracy. To date, 185 people have been wrongfully convicted, sentenced to death, and then exonerated in our country since 1973. That means that for every 8 people who have been put to death in our country since the 70s, 1 person has been wrongfully convicted, sentenced to die, later exonerated. And those are the people that we were able to figure it out in time. A key finding in another DPIC report that came out recently called the Innocence Epidemic, which talks about this number and more about the factors that go into wrongful conviction, they found that 69% of that 185 number of people who've been exonerated, 69% of those cases have included official misconduct by police, prosecutors, or other government officials. Official misconduct was much more likely in cases involving defendants of color, in cases which exonerations took 2 decades or more, and in cases in which DNA evidence was a significant factor in proving innocence ultimately. All of these things are at play in the case of Pervis Payne, and you'll hear more about that in a few minutes. So I've told you now a lot about what's wrong with the system, and let me assure you I could go on, but I want to talk for a minute about the progress that we're making as people are becoming more and more educated and more activated. According to the most recent Gallup polling, support for the death penalty is at its lowest level in 40 years. And when given alternatives, 60% of Americans prefer alternative sentences to the death penalty. Here in Tennessee, juries have delivered only 2 new death sentences since 2013, showing that Tennesseans are moving away from this practice, though this has unfortunately not translated to our states moving away from executing people who have been on our death row now for 20 and 30 years. Very recently, many of you know Virginia, very historically active death penalty state, recently became the 23rd state to repeal the death penalty, the first Southern state to do so. If you include now states where there are formal moratoria on the death penalty, or where the death penalty has not been used in over a decade, plus repeal states, there are 34 states which have ended the death penalty now in law or in practice. Ohio, another active death penalty state, has a viable repeal bill moving in its legislature as we speak. And just today, the Nevada State Assembly, which is like our state House of Representatives, passed a repeal bill, 26-16. That bill will now move to the Senate in Nevada as they continue to push for repeal in that state. These are great signs. These are positive signs, good trends, moving us in the right direction. But we know there is much work to do, and we need all of you to help us do that work. And we'll be providing some actions that you can take in a little while. You can do it later this evening before you even go to bed. You can take action to help us out. So in closing, I just want to say that I think it's important for all of us as we think about this issue to reflect and to ask ourselves, what is it? What are the reasons that we continue to hold on to the death penalty? Why do we maintain it? Does the death penalty make us safer? Does it help prevent future crimes? Does anyone gain better access to mental or behavioral health care because we have a death penalty? Does the death penalty offer any avenues for more and better intervention in the lives of children who are exposed to abuse and trauma, as so many of the individuals on death row were? Is an execution the best we can offer to surviving family members of murder victims and their communities to assist in their healing process? Does the death penalty model respect for the dignity of life? I think other states have asked themselves these questions and concluded the answer is no. The death penalty doesn't serve us. It doesn't make us safer. It's unfairly applied. It gets it wrong. It costs us dearly, both financially and in human cost. It diminishes all of us, and it must end. And together we will end it. Thank you.
Thanks, Stacy. I appreciate you sharing. We're so glad, Kelley, you were able to join us. I've told folks a little bit about who you are and the work that you do, but we would love for you to share more about your work as a capital defender. And then if you could give us also just an overview of Pervis's case and what's happening on his case right now.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. And I'm trying to sign on my computer. I drove to the office. So give me just 1 second. I might have a better connection. Just 1 second. I'll sign off of here as soon as I come up. And thank you again. I came over from the legislature where they just passed here we go. So can you hear me now?
Yes.
Great. Thank you all so much. So like I said, I just came from the legislature where they passed the bill out of Senate Judiciary to allow people like Pervis Payne and others the opportunity to get into court on their intellectual disability claims. So we will now be moving into House Criminal Justice General tomorrow, and then floor vote for both. So that's really great news. So thank you all for giving me this opportunity to speak to you and allowing me to be a little bit late to the meeting. But I'm certain that Rolanda represented well on behalf of Pervis, who is a very special client. And he is the embodiment of racism and the death penalty and all that is wrong with our criminal legal system. His case is all about racism, unfortunately, from the moment he was arrested, from right before he was arrested, because he went in to do what he was taught to do. He went in to help the victims. And then his race and their race became the overriding fear factor for him, legitimately so. He ran because he knew he would be seen as the assailant and not the protector of this family. And he was right. And that night when his mother went to the police station and begged them, please test my son for drugs. If you think he did this, test him for drugs. They failed. They failed him. They failed her. They ignored her. And why? Because of her race. And that's just a plain ugly fact. It's something that's uncomfortable for any of us to hear, but it's true. And I've said this many, many times because, you can look at me as a mom and know that if I had been at the police station that night, they would not have ignored me. And I feel it is my obligation to be the voice of Bernice Payne, to fight for her son where she can no longer fight for him, to stand in her shoes and fight until we bring her son home, because she never stopped believing in him. But this family has never stopped believing. I mean, their faith in a system to bring Pervis home, that they haven't lost hope and joy, is something we can all learn from. Because, they didn't have to trust in me and a new legal team. They could have easily said, we've heard this story before. They have been let down so many times by people who look like me, listening politely, and then when they leave the room saying, yeah, they just don't want to face reality. Pervis just doesn't want to tell his dad that he did it. And ignore it. Instead of looking at the case and looking at the facts and seeing the ways in which this tiny police department in Millington, Tennessee mishandled the evidence, hid the evidence, lost the evidence. They claim they didn't put film in the camera. I mean, come on. This was a murder case. And then even last year, they claim they have lost the victim's fingernail scrapings. This is about a system trying to protect an unlawful conviction because they don't want to admit what happened here. And what happened here is that an innocent man has spent 33, now 34 years behind bars, and his family has been incarcerated along with him. And it is time to bring him home to his family. The last thing I want to say is, since this is a topic about racism and the death penalty, one of the things that I was asked to do by a member of the legislature was to do an analysis of intellectual disability and race. In what ways do those two factors correlate? And what I found was shocking even to me. And that is 80% of the people on death row, both nationally as well as in Tennessee, who have claims that they are intellectually disabled and therefore ineligible for the death penalty, are people of color. So, these men are doubly, under the gun, or, doubly disadvantaged, because not only do we have a system that is systemically set up to convict and sentence people to death because of the color of their skin and because of the color of the victim's skin, but you have a system that is set up that traps people with intellectual disability who are people of color. And for all of those reasons, Pervis Payne's case is a wake-up call to all of us. It is the personification of everything that is wrong about the criminal legal system and the death penalty. And we are so grateful to the fact that we have over 700,000 supporters on our petition at pervispayne.org. And we're looking to get that number up to 1 million. So we are asking everybody to please go to pervispayne.org, sign that petition, put it out on social media, talk to your friends, talk to your neighbors, Sunday school circles, community groups, book clubs, wherever you go, speak about this case, because we can save a life. All of us can do it together. Thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thanks so much, Kelley, not just for sharing just now, but thank you especially for the work that you're doing on behalf of Pervis and so many others. We are grateful for you for the work that you're doing. Rolanda, I'd love it if you would take some time to tell us more about Pervis and about your family and the journey that you all have been on, and some more about your story.
Absolutely. So thank you so much, Reverend Lee. I want to give you your proper title there. So I appreciate that. Thank you so much for hosting this. And thank you. Stacy is a friend, so I call her Stacy now, So we take all the titles away right there. So thank you, Stacy. And to Sabrina, it's always a pleasure to share a platform with you. And every time I always say I never get tired of hearing your story, because you always give me one. And Kelley is the giant right here. She is the true goat. If I've never met another goat, I've met one right here, and that's Kelley. So I'm grateful to be here, and thank you all so much for giving us the opportunity to be able to share. I wrote down some things as Sabrina was speaking, because I do feel one of the main awarenesses that we need to bring is to know that, number one, everyone that's been convicted of a crime didn't do it. And number two, that there is a problem with our criminal system. I think those are two things that we have to be able to bring awareness to. And I know people make mistakes, with the police departments and the law teams or whoever, but when you involve someone's life and you have no conviction for disrupting a person's life, that's a problem to me. And when you realize that there is a truth in front of you and you choose to ignore the truth for a check mark to say, here I am now, hey, I got another conviction. So maybe now I'm next in line for promotion or however. When you do that, that's still a major problem, for me. When Sabrina was speaking about, them saying to her, we knew something would come out of this, where you live. That's stereotyping, and not only stereotyping her, but stereotyping where she decided to live. Same thing that, pretty much what happened with my brother. I was about to call him Bubba, but if you've been following, I call him Bubba. So I'm going to call him Bubba because don't sound right for me to call him Pervis, but I can for the lack of it. But I've been calling him Bubba since I was 2 years old. So, the same thing that happened to him. Stereotypes of his life, painting him to be a hypersexual person, and looking at magazines, and the magazine wasn't even the Playboy magazine. It was a Jet magazine, and so things like that, and that was never brought into light, and just him having prosecutorial, the misconducts, and even with his own defense team, he didn't have the proper defense. If we would have had a Kelley Henry back in the day, you all wouldn't know me right now, because and you wouldn't know about Pervis Payne, because he would be, we would be somewhere, enjoying life together. But unfortunately, we're fighting for justice on his behalf. And I often say that justice is not something that we should fight for. Justice it shouldn't be this hard, but it's such a hard fight to be able to prove an innocence of a person when their character has been so demoralized and dehumanized by our system. Um, I believe that when you believe in a person's innocence, you fight for it. And the reason we didn't have the fight before is because we couldn't get anyone to believe in my brother's innocence. And I would meet with people, and I would go out and visit Bubba, and we would write down, we call ourselves being the lawyers. So we would create things that, what I need to do when I leave from seeing him. And I would go out and meet with people and things. And we just could not get anyone who wanted to attack Memphis for some odd reason. And I couldn't understand that until later on. And someone told me, well, good luck, because they are, a hard task to be able to come up against, because of so many wrongdoings that they have a record of. And so when we came about with Kelley, and actually, I'm a huge believer of hope. If you have ever heard me speak on a Zoom regarding Bubba, it should be no secret that I am a believer. I'm a believer of Christ. And one thing is that our journey, to me, this is how I look at the journey, is that it didn't just start with me. The journey started with my mother. The journey started with my father. On June 27, 1987, when this happened with Bubba, the prayers and the belief and the hope begin then. And so what we're seeing now is, I believe in the Bible, and the word of God tells us that faith the size of a mustard seed will move a mountain. And if you look at a mustard seed is very small, but when it grows so many branches until the words say that the birds can lodge their nest. So I believe that the mustard seeds have been planted by my mother, by my grandmothers, by my father. And what we see now, the movement that we see now, there are the branches that are now coming, that are growing from what they have already sown for many, many years ago. And so I'm happy to see the movement. And we said we wanted this movement. I prayed for this movement. I didn't know how it was going to look, but I did. I prayed for this movement to happen. And to be honest with you, when we started to get the word out, I wanted to pump my brakes. I was like, whoa, wait a second. I didn't know it was going to be like this or that, hold on. But then I had to be reminded of what I prayed for. And so, this is what we see now. And I believe in my brother's innocence. I know that my brother is innocent. And he knows that he's innocent. Our family knows that he's innocent. I don't know if we could stay so consistent for so long if we didn't believe that. I don't know how to make you like catch on to that point. But if we did not believe in his character of who he is, it would be hard for us to stand by him for 34 years. Not only, with me, but he has uncles, and he has cousins and aunts who are still living, who we are behind him 110%. And so we're going to bring it home. When I went to visit him on Saturday, and I told my brother, I said, we are going to bring you home. And I meant that. I meant that with everything, and I only had 1 hour And somebody asked me, how was your time with Pervis? I said, we had 1 hour of power. And I mean, it was power packed. We talked about so much in such a little time because I haven't seen him in a year since March the 9th of 2020. But I told him that. And I said, Bubba, I said, we have over 600,000 people who believe in you, who believe in your innocence. I said, so if we have a 10 or 100 who come and want to not believe, we don't worry about them because we still have an army that is still fighting to free Pervis Payne. So we're encouraged, you know. The hope is in me. Hope tells me, if you haven't heard it, hope is the expectation, the anticipation that something good is going to happen. It is the assurance that it hasn't happened yet, but it will. So I believe that something good is going to happen. And I don't know about you, but I feel good in the atmosphere. So thank you so much for this time. And I appreciate it. As Kelley say, let's do 1 million strong. I believe we can get 1 million signatures. If we're at 700,000, that means we've gotten 50,000, Kelley, in less than a month. Because about a month ago, we were at 650. So if we're at 700,000, let's get 1 million strong. And we want to send a message to Tennessee to let them know that it's not okay. And this is unacceptable. And if Bubba has to be the catalyst to make the change, we're on this train with him to do so. So thank you so much.
Rolanda, I can't thank you enough for telling your story. And I hope from here forward, you'll know me as Anna, that we're friends now. We're in this together. And I hope that as you see your brother and can continue to write to him and tell him, letting him know that we're behind him, that we're with him, and that there are so many people that have never met him, maybe won't get to meet him in person, but are fighting for him and believe in him and your family. So we just so appreciate the hope that you're bringing tonight and that you bring to this process. It's impacting a lot of people. Well, you all have heard so many important things tonight about stories from the families represented here and from the other folks that are working so hard on this issue. But it's not just our words. We want to tell you about what you can do. We need to move our feet and use our voices. So Stacy, I'd love for you to tell us a little bit more about some action steps of things that we can do, ways that we can get involved today, this week, things that we can do. So Stacy's going to share a screen with us so we can look at that, and then we'll take some question and answer. So be thinking of those questions you've got, because we're going to get to that in just a minute.
Yeah, thanks so much. And, again, thanks to everybody who's here and the amazing work that's been going on to get Pervis's story out and to talk about just how our system is failing and how much work we need to do. I hope everybody, if you don't already get emails from Tennesseans for Alternatives to the Death Penalty, I hope you'll sign up to do that. That's how you're going to know when things are coming up, events, actions, all sorts of things that we can give you a heads up about and tell you what to do and how to do it. So sign up. You'll see that link. Kelley's already mentioned pervispayne.org, and that we want to get more and more folks signing up there. So please go check it out, sign up, share it, let folks know about that site. Let's get up to 1 million. Governor Lee, we're still working to tell Governor Lee that we need clemency for Pervis. We have a sample letter on our website. You can go to TennesseeDeathPenalty.org to get involved, petitions to governor, and you'll see the sample there. Feel free to take that, put it in your own words, but it's going to give you the issues and the things that are important for Governor Lee to know how you feel and kind of what your thoughts are. Kelley's mentioned legislation. Call your lawmakers, email your lawmakers. There's a link, capital.tn.gov. You can find out who those are. If you don't know who they are, ask them to support legislation that would modernize our intellectual disability law in Tennessee and prevent our state from executing people with intellectual disability. It's so critical for Pervis and for many others. So that's another action you can take. And like I said, if you get on our email list, we'll be able to keep you sort of in the know as that legislation is moving forward. So those are some things. I'm sure there are many others, but I hope that you can at least maybe pick a few and decide to work on those or do them all. That'd be great too. So thanks, Anna.
Thank you. And I just want to echo that. Go today to sign the petition for Pervis and also to sign up for those TADP emails. Those are so helpful. Those will come to your inbox and they'll let you know, today, what is the one thing I could do to support this cause. So that's a really important thing for us to do. Right now, we want to take some questions for our panelists, these incredible folks who are here. So if you've got questions, you can submit those through the Q&A feature or through the chat feature, whichever is easiest for you. So I'm going to be watching for those as they come through. But I want to start us off as you guys are getting a second to type those into the chat and into the Q&A. Sabrina, I want to start with you. If you would tell us, how did you get through those years of incarceration? What kept you going despite all those obstacles that you faced, knowing your own innocence, not getting the help and support that you needed? What kept you going? How did you make it through that situation?
Well, at first I was angry. You know what I mean? I was kind of angry at God, and I was just angry because I was like, I tried to save my son and you guys called me a murderer. I could not understand, and plus being a kid too, trying to figure out, what happened. That part right there killed me because I never knew what my son died from until the second trial. So I went all those years not knowing what happened to him. And so that right there, and I didn't know where he was buried. I didn't know anything. Nobody told me anything. So that hurt me the most because I never knew. And secondly, my death date. I always talk about that because people need to know how it actually feels to be sitting in a place that you have no control. When my death date came, that was one of the hardest things for me because I had no attorneys to tell me that the state had to exhaust all state remedies before they could actually carry out a death sentence. So I always let people know that I paced the floors, man, I listened for every chain, every sound, because I actually thought that was the day that they was gonna kill me. I actually thought that because, I didn't know. When you have a client, if there's any lawyers out there, talk to your client. Meet your client where they are. Don't just assume. Don't go in thinking, oh man, you're guilty or whatever. That was my problem with the attorneys that I had. I felt like nobody believed me. How can you get your client to trust you if you already are putting out signs that you don't believe what they're saying? But after a while, I started writing, and I just started. It was a girl that was on death row with me. She started talking to me. We became friends. We used to talk between the toilets and stuff, and she kept me going. And eventually, I just got back into, loving God and understanding exactly what He wanted me to do. And that's what grew my strength. That's what made me stronger. So I started writing. And I started saying, no, this is not going to happen. I've got to do something. And then I knew that my mom was on the outside fighting for me too. So that is a lot of it. She fought hard for me. But people don't understand that when the person's locked up, it's not only them that's doing the time. It's your family too. My mom went homeless and everything trying to fight for me because nobody wanted to hear about my case. They even told her, you might as well shut up. We got her. We're going to donate her body to science. They told her all kind of crazy stuff. I mean, you know what I mean? It's crazy the way back then, the way it was done, racism and all that stuff. It was horrible. So I don't wish that on anyone.
Thank you for sharing that with us and for telling us more about your story. This is a question, Kelley, maybe this is one that you can kind of help us with. There's Judith from the chat is saying that she writes to a death row prisoner at a prison in Mississippi, and that there's strong evidence that he did not commit a death penalty crime. But she's curious, what can someone do? Who should they contact? How to get someone to listen, to get another look at a case of someone that you might know who's in this situation?
So specifically in Mississippi, if you send me an email, Kelley, KELLEY_Henry, HENRY at FD.org, I'll put you in connection with some people I know in Mississippi who are good lawyers. David Boyson is one who comes to mind. but it's finding those lawyers in the States. There are innocence projects all across the country now, besides just the one in New York, but they become overwhelmed, and they can't take every single case, and DNA isn't always going to be the evidence that you need in order to exonerate. I would also say that in many states where there are death penalty jurisdictions, there are capital habeas units in federal public defender's office. That's what I'm in. And I saw that Beth Ford is one of our attendees, and she has a capital habeas unit in her office in Knoxville. There are 22 capital habeas units across the country, so you can look for us in your closest jurisdiction, and we can help connect you to somebody who can help, even if we can't. But I want to say, don't give up. It's the people who rattle those cages who keep talking and keep getting through to the lawyers. It took Rolanda 31 years to get a lawyer who was willing to listen to her family. And she never gave up. And even while she was trying to get me to listen to her family, she was writing the Innocence Project and other people who were sending me emails going, would you please talk to Rolanda Holman, and you just got to keep it up. You just got to never, ever give up, because as messed up as the system is, there is hope. And Rolanda has taught me that is through Jesus. And we just have to use the gifts that were given us and do everything that we can. But I applaud people who are writing to my guys on death row, because Sabrina can tell you more than I can, but that lifeline, so many of my clients don't have a Rolanda in their life. And the lifeline of those letters that seem meaningless or like not enough to you when you're at home writing can literally be the difference between life and death. I have had clients who've told me that they were going to end it all, but for the connections that they had. So being a person's family, being somebody who can talk to them is so important, because we can't give up on our brothers and sisters who are in prison.
Thank you so much, Kelley. That's such a helpful set of kind of advice and input. I hope that's helpful to you, Judith. Thanks for your question. Rolanda, question for you. How is Pervis holding up? How is he doing? What's his state right now as he's going through, obviously, what's a really difficult time?
Actually, he's really good. And the reason that I can say he's good is because this is what I wish I could just tell you how many years we have planned and we have talked about, getting this movement. And I've always called it a movement, like, man, Bubba, we need to create this movement. We need to do this. And so, as Kelley was saying, you just cannot give up. You have to find something that fuels your fire. And whatever fuels your fire, you got to keep going, and when I got into my brother's case, that's what I began to do. I began to look at it. I began to say something's wrong, and I was the devil's advocate, with him. And because my mother shielded us, she didn't want us to know about, everything that was going on, because we were young. So she didn't want, to keep us away from, the negative thing. And the bad thing was that he was sentenced to death. So when he and I, of course, we talked about this over the course of the years. So for him to be able to see this support, he is just, he feels so much hope. He feels so much hope. And, and I can say, at this moment, he is really good. He's really in a good place in his spirit. He's in a good place in his heart. And he knows that this is not over. He understands what is before him, but he is very hopeful to be able to see right now that we are out here fighting, and our fight is getting some traction and some movement.
Good. I'm so glad to hear that, and again, grateful that you got to see him in person after
Yes.
all this time. Stacy, a question for you. As folks in this webinar are having conversations in their day-to-day life with people who have differing views on the death penalty in Tennessee, what are some of the reasons that you see that people are still supporting the death penalty? What are those main arguments that you see?
Well, a lot of it is just not understanding how the system works in reality. Not understanding the unfairness of it, not understanding the racism of it, not understanding, the extreme cost, of all of those things. And so as people learn more, then you can really begin. They begin to sort of ask some questions. I think one of the things that I probably hear the most, and probably all of you do, is that we need this for the victims and for the victims' families. And obviously, not being a murder victim's family member, I cannot speak on behalf of someone who's gone through that, but I do know quite a few folks, and I've had the privilege of learning a lot from families who have gone through this. And what I hear over and over is this system harms us. It traps us for decades. There is not legal finality. Every time it comes up, every hearing, every time, it is one more reminder. Whereas the alternatives that we have in Tennessee at least provide some measure of legal finality much sooner. And so I think it's really important for people to think about that. Another piece of that is that, the vast majority of people who commit homicide do not end up on death row. And so we have to then begin to go back to those questions about, well, why did the people who end up on death row end up there? And that's when we get back into those issues like, what county did they live in? What color was the victim of the crime? Did they have a mental health issue? Like these are the things that begin to sort of narrow down who is actually on our death row. And I think another thing that is important for people to understand is that, all of the resources, both the human energy and resources and the financial that we put into pursuing the death penalty, millions and millions and millions more dollars than we would spend if we simply had the alternatives. Those are dollars that are not going to support people who are impacted by violence, people who have trauma that hasn't been dealt with, communities that have trauma that hasn't been dealt with, all the needs that people have in the wake of a violent crime. We could be doing so much more to address those things in a preventative way, in a way that actually helps prevent violence from happening. And so I think people have to sort of think about that when you just say, well, we do it for victims' families, right? There's a lot more to that. And Anna, you know about that.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up, Stacy. One of the reasons I'm involved in this work and am passionate about this topic is that my grandmother's brother was murdered before I was born. And so as I grew up, that was part of our family's pain and story, was the death of my Uncle Charlie. And Nick Sutton was the man who committed that murder, and his execution date came up last year, and my family worked alongside many others in a clemency case for Nick Sutton. It was our deep desire and hope that Nick would not be executed. That was not what our family wanted. That was not what was going to bring us peace or closure or any of those things. So sadly, despite the work of many of the people on this call and incredible people across our state, Nick was executed in February, I guess, of 2020. And the night that I stood and held a candle at a vigil, the night of his death, was just adding another tragedy to the list of tragedies that had already happened. It was no more peace, no more closure. It was yet another sadness. So being the family member of a victim and generations of people impacted by that, I can say that while victims' families don't all agree on this topic, there are so many who don't choose this path, who don't want this path. So I appreciate, Stacy, the work that you're doing, and so many of you all on behalf of victims' families and folks that are on death row. So thank you for that. We're going to have time for just maybe one or two more questions. Sarah has asked, Kelley, can you say a bit more about where Pervis is in the legal process right now? What's the status on his case as of today?
As of today, the reprieve that the governor granted him expired on Friday. So right now he is vulnerable. an execution date could be set at any time, and we won't have notice before it is set. We'll just get an email with an order or maybe a phone call before the email comes. So that is obviously very disconcerting for all of us. At the same time, our clemency petition is pending with Governor Lee, and we are hopeful that he will hear our voice and the voice of our diverse coalition of supporters, all the way from former Solicitor General Ken Starr to Martin Luther King III, to all those people that I spoke about earlier. And we also are hopeful that this legislation will wind its way through the Tennessee legislature and pass. If it does, the next day, we will file a lawsuit in Shelby County to get Mr. Payne back into court on his intellectual disability issue. But as it stands right now, there are no further legal avenues open to us unless we get new information of innocence, which I guarantee you we are on the street looking for. And if anyone knows or hears of any information that they think could be useful to our case, please call me, 615-337-0469. My DMs are open at Kelley J. Henry on Twitter. Let me know if you know anything, because as Rolanda says, and as I say, as long as there's breath in my body and breath in his, we will not stop until we bring him home.
Thank you. And I hope all of you all who are with us tonight hear the urgency of this matter. And when we say, please write to Governor Lee in support of this clemency, please go to pervispayne.org. All those things, that's a today, tomorrow, tonight thing to do. That's not something to put on the list for later. Okay, as we are wrapping up, we want to honor the time of all the incredible people who are on our panel and those of you who are watching with us. Stacy, Chrissy has asked a question in the Q&A, and I think maybe it's a great one for us to end on because of TADP's support of this event. Can you tell us a little bit about what it means when we say alternatives to the death penalty? That's in the name of the organization that you run, but what does that mean? What would the alternatives be? I think that's something that a lot of folks don't know much about and are curious about.
Sure. And our organization doesn't promote any particular alternative. We simply name that there are alternatives and that there are all sorts of alternatives we had even, our system hasn't even addressed or come up with yet. Like there's lots out there. Currently, however, in Tennessee, we have a life sentence, which is a very harsh life sentence. Right now, it's a 51-year sentence before you're eligible for parole. It's probably the harshest life sentence in the country. The other option we have is life without the possibility of parole, which again is exactly what it says, is that if you get that sentence, you never have parole eligibility. They're very, very harsh sentences. Those are at this point the alternatives that we have in Tennessee to the death penalty.
Thank you. And thank you to all of you, to Sabrina and Rolanda and Kelley and Stacy, just for your time, for your work, for sharing your heart, your honesty and vulnerability. You guys are making a difference in the world every day, and we thank you. And we want you to know that we're with you and you're not in this work alone. So thank you. And to all of you who have been here for this webinar, we're so appreciative of your time. You also can and do make a difference. Your lawmakers, listen to your voices. It does matter when you call. It does matter when you write a letter. So please speak up and don't stop, and share this information with as many people as you can. We have been recording. Stacy, is there a way folks can get this recording if they'd like to share this with others?
Yes, I think we will, let me work on that, but I think we have folks email if they, when they registered, so we can get that to people. Yeah.
Great. Thank you. Do those action steps, get to work this evening and tomorrow. And thank you again for sharing your time and your attention with us. God bless you. And we hope to work alongside you each day. Good night.
Thank you so much,
you.
everybody. Thank you, Anna.